Section 1. The town that should not exist. Go ahead and get comfortable. Whatever position works for you, sink into it now. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your jaw unclench. You might not have realized it was clenched at all until just now. Let the weight of the day settle down through the mattress or the couch cushion or whatever you are lying on tonight, and let it go. Because what we are doing right now, together, is something slow and careful. We are going into the world of Family Guy. Not the loud version, not the clip show, not the compilation video, not the late-night rerun with the laugh track. The quiet version. The version where you slow everything down far enough to see what is actually in there, layered underneath all the noise. Family Guy has been running since the 31st of January 1999. That is more than 25 years of continuous storytelling. 25 years of characters who age without ever growing old, of a town that burns down and is standing again before the next commercial break, of a baby who once had genuine plans to enslave civilization and now mostly just wants to go on road trips with a talking dog he loves, in a way he never quite says out loud. 25 years of jokes that went too far, and moments of genuine tenderness that caught everyone off guard, and mysteries that were planted in the early episodes by people who cared about craft and were never fully resolved by anyone who came after. Tonight we are going to go into those mysteries, one at a time. At whatever pace feels right, let the details wash over you without trying to hold on to all of them. Some of this you will remember when you wake up. Some of it will dissolve into the general texture of the night. Either outcome is fine. The point is not to memorize. The point is to drift through a familiar place and discover how much of it you never actually saw. But before we go anywhere, we need to start at the very beginning. Not with a character, not with a joke, with the place itself. Quahog, Rhode Island. Pronounced Quahog. If you have been saying it wrong in your head for years, now you know. It is a fictional city placed in Newport County, Rhode Island, on the Atlantic coast of New England. The name itself is both a regional inside joke and a piece of coastal working-class culture. A quahog, in the real world, is a type of hard-shelled clam native to the Atlantic seaboard, the kind that ends up in clam chowder from Massachusetts to Maryland. Seth MacFarlane, who created the show, grew up in New England, attended the Rhode Island School of Design, and built Quahog from the inside out from a place he actually knew, with geography and culture and social texture he had absorbed before he ever pitched a 15-minute pilot to a Fox executive in Los Angeles. The town itself is a mystery in its most basic parameters. In the episode Tom Tucker, The Man and His Dream, the population of Quahog is listed as exactly 800 people, 800 residents. In the real world, a municipality of 800 people would be a village, a place with maybe one traffic light, a general store, and a volunteer fire department. But other episodes of Family Guy show Quahog with a sprawling suburban grid, a functioning international airport, a city hall large enough to host political conventions, multiple high schools, an asylum, a professional sports arena, several shopping malls, a waterfront, a university, and enough traffic congestion to be a source of ongoing complaint. None of this is consistent with 800 residents. The math does not work and the show does not try to make it work. This is not a continuity error in the traditional sense. It is a design philosophy. Quahog was built to be elastic to be whatever size the current story needs. When the characters need to feel like they are in a small town where everyone knows everyone and the same handful of people keep appearing in each other's lives, it contracts. When the plot needs a public venue, a crowd, a cityscape, a sense of urban scale, it expands. The city breathes in and out according to narrative need, and the population number of 800 is just one data point in a geography that was never meant to be internally consistent. What is consistent about Quahog is its mythology, and the founding myth is one of the stranger details buried in this show's long history. In the episode Peter's Progress, the story of Quahog's founding is told in detail. The city was established by a man named Griffin Peterson, who had been exiled from England to the American colonies by King Stuart III. King Stuart. Say that name carefully. King Stuart. And the man who founded the town the Griffins live in shares part of the name of the youngest Griffin child, Stewie. Whether this is a deliberate connection planted by the writers, a joke that runs deeper than the surface of the episode, or just a coincidence that nobody thought much about at the time, is something the show has never clarified. But it sits there in the canon, quietly tying the beginning of the town to the most mysterious and complicated member of the family that would eventually come to define it. There is a competing founding myth within the show, which is the story of Miles Musket and the magical talking clam. According to this version, Quahog was founded with the assistance of a clam who could speak, a detail the show presents straight-faced and then never revisits. In a show that already features a talking dog, the talking clam is not, in context, particularly unusual. What is unusual is that the show has two different founding myths for the same town and never bothers to reconcile them. Either Griffin Peterson founded Quahog or Miles Musket and a clam did. Both accounts exist in the show's official lore. Neither is formally privileged over the other. The town began, somehow, and here it is. The zip code of Quahog is established in one episode as 00093. This is not a real zip code. Real Rhode Island codes begin with 028 or 029. The 00093 was clearly invented, and it was clearly invented with intention. Someone sat in a writer's room and picked those specific digits, and nobody has ever publicly explained why. Some fans have theorized that it is an internal production reference. Others think it is a joke about being outside any recognizable geography. One theory holds that 00093 was chosen because it does not correspond to anywhere, and a town like Quahog should not correspond to anywhere either. Whatever the reason, it is another piece of the show's careful construction of a place that acknowledges its own fictiveness. The address of the Griffin House, 31 Spooner Street, carries its own quiet strangeness. The name Spooner evokes old New England, the kind of street name you find in Providence or Newport, where every road is named after some colonial-era family that has long since scattered or died out. Spooner Street as an address implies a history the show has never told. Someone named Spooner was once important enough to name a road after, and now the Griffins live on it, and Peter drives away from it every day on his way to the brewery, without anyone ever stopping to wonder whose street this actually is. In the episode E. Peter Bus Unum, a survey reveals that the Griffin House at 31 Spooner Street is not technically within the legal boundaries of Quahog. It is not within the boundaries of any recognized municipality. It is not within the United States of America. It exists in a jurisdictional gap, a piece of land that somehow escaped classification. Peter responds to this discovery by declaring his property an independent nation, which he names Pretoria. The name Peterland had already been taken by a local establishment, so Pretoria it is. The episode is played for comedy, but it establishes something genuinely strange. The family that is most central to the show lives in a house that does not officially belong to the city they live in. They are neighbors and residents and community members, and their house is not legally part of the community. They exist slightly outside the frame of the place that frames them. Spooner Street also has remarkable geographic stability, given how much gets destroyed in its vicinity. Over the course of the show's run, various buildings on and around Spooner Street have been demolished, burned, flooded, smashed, blown up, overrun, crushed, and otherwise catastrophically damaged. The street is always whole again by the time the next episode begins. No explanation, no rebuilding montage, no insurance claim storyline. Just the street, intact, as if the destruction were a dream that faded when the morning came. This quality of indestructibility extends to Quahog as a whole. The city has survived alien invasions, giant monsters, nuclear near misses, zombie outbreaks, multiple large-scale fires, and at least one occasion where it was essentially obliterated and rebuilt. It always comes back, always whole. The buildings that were leveled are standing again. The landmarks that were destroyed are present in the establishing shot. Quahog cannot be permanently damaged because Quahog is not subject to the physics of permanent damage. It is a container for stories, and containers do not wear out. They just get refilled. The Drunken Clam, which is the bar where Peter and his friends spend a substantial portion of their lives, has a real-world counterpart in the Providence area. When Rhode Island tourism groups organized Family Guy location tours, yes, these were real things that happened. The tours included stops connected to the real-world inspirations for the show's locations. The Drunken Clam exists in that space between the fictional and the real, the same way Quahog itself does. It is grounded in actual geography while being simultaneously invented. The Pawtucket Brewery, where Peter eventually finds permanent employment after losing his job at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, is based loosely on the real brewery culture of Rhode Island and its surrounding area. The Pawtucket Patriot Ale that Peter and his friends drink is not a real beer, But the kind of local sports beer loyalty it represents is absolutely real, rooted in the specific way New England communities attach their identities to local brands and local teams, with a ferocity that people from elsewhere sometimes find baffling. Seth MacFarlane built Quahog out of materials he actually knew. The Rhode Island detail is not window dressing, it is structure. The show's specific sense of humor, its working-class textures, its relationship to Catholic family dynamics and bar culture and sports loyalties, and the particular kind of ethnic neighborhood insularity that characterizes coastal New England, none of that came from research. It came from living. Which is why, even in the show's worst seasons, when the writing was lazy and the characters felt thin, the setting still felt inhabited. The place remembered being real even when the people in it had stopped quite being themselves. Somewhere inside this indestructible fictional city, on a street named after someone nobody remembers, in a house that does not officially exist within any nation, a family sleeps. A man who was born in Mexico during a failed abortion procedure and grew up to become the most chaotic person in any room he enters. A woman whose past includes relationships with multiple members of prominent rock bands and a kleptomaniac streak she spent years concealing. A teenager born with a tail and named after a transformer without her knowledge or consent. A boy who is stranger than anyone on the show has ever given him credit for. A dog who keeps a firearm somewhere very specific and very deliberate for reasons that are among the saddest things anyone in this cast has ever admitted out loud. And a baby who arrived in the world with plans already formed, who built weapons before he could reliably walk, and who once came closer than anyone on the show likes to acknowledge to actually changing the entire world. All of them in a house in a city that should not exist. That is where we are beginning tonight, and we are going to take our time. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from, and what time it is where you are. There is something wonderful about all of these different time zones, all of these different rooms, all of these different people finding their way to the same quiet space on the same night. And if you have not subscribed yet, this would be a good moment to do it. It takes a second and it genuinely helps this kind of content keep coming. Section 2, Stewie Griffin, and the question that was never answered. There is a moment in the very first episode of Family Guy, which aired on the 31st of January 1999, right after the Super Bowl, where a 1-year-old baby walks calmly into a kitchen, points a mind control device at a federal judge, and alters the legal outcome of a fraud trial. No setup, no explanation, no character looks surprised. The baby simply has the device. He knows exactly how to use it. He deploys it with the calm efficiency of someone who has been operating advanced technology for long enough that it no longer requires conscious thought. That baby is Stewie Griffin. And the question of what, precisely, Stewie Griffin actually is, where his capabilities come from, what his purpose might be, why a 1-year-old child arrived in the world with not just superhuman intelligence but also a specific, coherent plan to dominate all of humanity was planted in that first episode and has never been answered. Not definitively. Not in a way the show committed to. What the show established in those early seasons is considerably more elaborate than most people take the time to remember, particularly people who encountered the show later and knew only the softer, more emotional Stewie of the middle and later seasons. Start with the episode Chitty Chitty Death Bang from the first season. In this episode, it is revealed that when Stewie was born, when Lois delivered him in a hospital, in what should have been an ordinary birth, the doctor found something in the birth canal that Stewie had apparently been keeping with him in utero. A map of Europe, with the capital cities of European nations already marked and annotated with bombing plans. Stewie came out of Lois with a military strategy already prepared. His desire for world domination was not something that developed after birth through some sequence of experiences or influences. He arrived with it operational. He was not born and then became an evil genius. He emerged as one, the same way other babies emerge with already functional hearts and nervous systems. His supervillainy was congenital. This is one of the most bizarre pieces of mythology in the show's entire run, and it is the one that the writers seemed least interested in explaining. We are told that Stewie had plans inside his mother before he was born. We are shown the plans, and then the show moves on. No one asks where the plans came from. No one wonders what it means about Stewie's nature, about his origin, about what kind of entity could have been developing inside Lois's womb for 9 months while simultaneously drafting geopolitical strategies. The show just accepts it and moves forward. The technology Stewie built and used in the early seasons was not played for laughs. Not really. The humor was in the contrast between his appearance a baby in a diaper, sitting in a high chair, eating mashed peas, and what he was actually doing. But what he was actually doing was real within the logic of the show. The ray guns fired actual energy beams. They hit things, they burned holes. When Stewie built a time machine, the time machine worked. When he built a weather control device, the weather changed. The weapons were functional. The technology was not cartoonish in the sense of being impotent. It produced real effects in the real world of the show. This matters enormously when thinking about the trajectory of Stewie's character, because it means that in the early seasons, Stewie was a genuine threat, not a funny would-be villain who always failed, an actual one who came close to succeeding multiple times, and was stopped not by the failure of his plans but by circumstances outside his control. In the early seasons, if a single thing had gone slightly differently on several occasions, Lois Griffin would have been dead. The world would have been under new management. A baby in a yellow t-shirt would have been its ruler. The show knew this and embraced it. The character worked precisely because he was not scaled down to be cute. He was scaled up to be genuinely terrifying. And the terror was funny because of the diaper. Remove the diaper, and the yellow shirt, and the high chair, and Stewie Griffin is a monster. Put them back, and he is the most original character on television. His obsession with Lois, specifically not Peter, not the world at large, not any particular political or military target, but Lois personally is one of the show's most interesting unresolved threads. He wanted to end his mother above all else. The world domination was secondary, or perhaps intertwined with the Lois mission in ways the show was never fully explicit about. The attacks on Lois were the most consistent and the most emotionally intense things Stewie did in the early seasons. He thought about her constantly. He built devices specifically designed to eliminate her. He celebrated near successes with a genuine joy that he never quite showed for anything else. Why? The most obvious reading is that Lois represents the cage. She is the one who controls his life, who decides when he eats and sleeps and bathes, who treats him as a baby when he knows himself to be something entirely beyond that. Getting rid of her would be liberation. But liberation from what? Stewie is a baby. He cannot survive without the very person he is trying to eliminate. The scheme, if it ever succeeded, would also be his own ending, practically speaking. There is a more complicated reading that the show occasionally gestured toward, particularly in the episode Stewie Loves Lois at the start of Season 5. In this episode, Lois rescues Stewie's beloved stuffed bear Rupert from a neighborhood dog. Stewie's response to this act of care is something he finds deeply uncomfortable. He feels gratitude. He feels affection. He begins behaving tenderly toward Lois in ways that horrify him on some level, because they undermine the clean hatred that has been his primary mode with her. The episode shows Stewie struggling with the realization that he might actually love his mother, that the obsession he has directed at her all this time might have a much warmer substrate than he has ever admitted. If that is true, then the murderous fixation of the early seasons was always a form of passionate attachment that Stewie had no other vocabulary for. He did not know how to love her in a recognizable way, so he oriented his most intense feelings toward her as a target. The weapon and the devotion were the same thing, expressed in the only language available to him. The Season 6 two-parter, Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, served as the official farewell ceremony for this version of the character. These episodes gave Stewie everything he had spent the previous 6 seasons trying to accomplish. He eliminated Lois. He took over the world. He sat on a throne and ruled. He became everything he said he wanted to be. And then the twist came. It was a simulation. A computer program. He had been modeling the outcome, not living it. The victory was real only inside a virtual space. What the show was doing with this reveal is something the writers themselves may not have been fully conscious of. By letting Stewie experience his triumph inside a simulation, by letting him have the thing he wanted and feel what it felt like, and then take it away, the show was suggesting that the wanting had always been more important than the achieving. That the goal was sustainable as a goal precisely because it was never going to be accomplished. The moment it was accomplished, even fictionally, something went out of it. The episodes after that two-parter are notably different in their treatment of Stewie. He does not pursue Lois with the same intensity. He does not build the same kinds of weapons. The plan was retired not because the writers ran out of ideas for it, but because the character had, on some level, run out of need for it. What replaced the evil genius was a Stewie in transition searching for who he was, without the organizing principle of world domination. The episodes that followed leaned increasingly into his friendship with Brian, into his emotional life, into his questions about his identity and sexuality and place in a world that saw him only as an infant. These storylines were sometimes moving and sometimes very funny, and sometimes both at once. But they were categorically different from what the show had built Stewie to be. The episode Send in Stewie, Please from season 16 is one of the most interesting pieces of character work the show produced in its later years. It is essentially a single-room therapy session, Stewie and a child psychologist, talking, for the length of an episode. Partway through this conversation, Stewie drops his accent. The elaborate British vowels, the theatrical diction, the Bond villain cadences that have been his defining characteristic since the pilot He Lets Them Go, speaks in an ordinary American child's voice. And the show presents this as a moment of revelation. The accent was always a performance. The theatrical supervillain persona was always a costume. Something constructed, consciously or not, as a shield. If the persona was always constructed, if the evil genius routine was always in some sense a choice, then the question of who Stewie is underneath it becomes the most interesting question the show never answered. The therapy episode shows us a flash of that underneath. But the episode ends. The accent comes back, the costume goes back on. We are left with the sense that we got close to something true without quite reaching it. There is also the matter of Bertram, Stewie's half-brother, the improbable consequence of a sperm donation Peter made at a fertility clinic in an earlier episode. Bertram is himself a genius, with his own ambitions and his own willingness to use advanced capabilities to pursue them. The conflict between Stewie and Bertram spans several episodes and eventually involves Bertram using Stewie's time machine to travel back to Renaissance Italy, specifically to eliminate Leonardo da Vinci, whom the show establishes as Stewie's direct ancestor. This is one of the most significant pieces of mythology the show ever dropped and then failed to pick back up. Leonardo da Vinci, the 15th century inventor, painter, scientist, anatomist, and engineer. One of the most broadly gifted minds in recorded history, and Stewie is his direct descendant. The implication is enormous. Stewie's genius is not anomalous, it is an inheritance. It has been moving through a lineage for 600 years, expressing itself differently in each generation, arriving most completely and most strangely in a 1-year-old baby in Rhode Island who built a time machine and used it to visit his own ancestor to stop his own brother from erasing him from history. Stewie had to eliminate Bertram in that timeline to survive. He did. He then had to become his own ancestor in a manner the episode handles with deliberate vagueness. The episode is wild and funny and deeply strange. But the detail it leaves behind, that Stewie's capabilities are traceable to a specific historical figure, that his genius is documented in a lineage, is the kind of thing a show that cared about its own mythology would have returned to. Family Guy planted it and moved on. The spin-off series announced for Stewie after season 23 is the first serious creative investment in the character as a subject in his own right since the early seasons. The premise places him in a preschool, forced to navigate the boredom of ordinary early childhood while using his arsenal of fantastical devices to turn routine days into something more interesting. 2 seasons were ordered by Fox. Whether this spin-off will do anything with the accumulated mythology, the Da Vinci bloodline, the unanswered question of his origin, the persona beneath the accent, the relationship between the evil genius and the quietly loving boy he became, remains to be seen. What we do know is that Stewie Griffin is still in there. The character who arrived fully formed in 1999, with plans already drawn up and a specific target already identified, is still available to any writer willing to find him. The original Stewie was dangerous. He was unpredictable. He charged every scene with a kind of electric potential because you never quite knew what he was going to do or say or build next. That Stewie built a time machine in his crib. He came with a map of Europe's capital cities already annotated. He was unlike anything on television before or since. Somewhere inside the softer, warmer, more emotionally available Stewie of the current seasons, that original is still present, latent, the way all of us carry the earliest versions of ourselves somewhere deep underneath whoever we have become since. Section 3. Brian Griffin, the unfinished novel, and what he keeps in a vault. There is a safety deposit box in a bank somewhere in the Quahog area. It belongs to Brian Griffin, who rents it the way a person would rent one, with a key and an annual fee and a visit every so often to check that things are where he left them. Inside the box, among whatever documents or valuables a talking dog might consider worth protecting behind 2 locks and a steel door, there is a handgun. Brian put it there himself. He chose it deliberately. He stored it at a specific distance from his everyday life, far enough that reaching it requires effort and intention, close enough that the option remains available when he needs it to be. In the Season 8 episode Brian and Stewie, the show reveals this detail in one of the quietest and most affecting scenes it ever produced. Brian and Stewie have been locked in a bank vault over the course of a weekend. There is no plot. There are no cutaway gags. There is no external conflict except the circumstance of their confinement. There are just 2 characters with nothing to do but talk, in a room together, with nowhere to go. Stewie finds the weapon in the box. Brian deflects and changes the subject. Stewie keeps asking. Eventually, after the kind of pause that comes before a truth someone has been carrying for a long time, Brian explains. It is there in case he ever decides he does not want to keep going. Not as protection against external threats, not as a collector's item. As a door Brian has deliberately left open, kept behind enough barriers that it requires real commitment to reach, but left open. Stewie's response is the other half of the scene's emotional weight. He does not deliver a speech or reason with Brian or tell him he has so much to live for. He simply begins crying. The baby who once designed weapons of mass destruction weeps at the idea of a world without Brian in it. Not because Brian's life is objectively valuable in some abstract sense, but because Brian is, for Stewie, the person who has always been there. The one who went on the adventures. The one who sat with him when no one else in the house could even hear what he was saying. The weapon means Brian has been preparing for the possibility of an ending the same way he has been preparing for other things, partially, carefully, without being willing to either fully commit or fully walk away. Kept, like everything in Brian's emotional life, at a calculated distance from full acknowledgement. Brian Edward Griffin is described in the show as approximately 10 years old, in the middle of a Labrador Retriever's expected lifespan. He arrived as a stray, picked up by Peter Griffin on a rainy night. Peter gave him a sandwich, brought him inside, and Brian has lived with the Griffins ever since. The simplicity of that origin story is part of its appeal. A wet dog, a kind gesture, a family formed. But the show fills in the edges of Brian's pre-Griffin history in ways that complicate the simple image. He was born in Austin, Texas, to a mother named Biscuit who was a purebred show dog belonging to a family that was not attentive or caring in their ownership. When Brian was weaned from Biscuit, he was separated from her. Biscuit was later stuffed and turned into a table by the people who owned her. A literal piece of furniture. Brian discovered this. He had to look at his mother, mounted and lacquered, the last time he went back. The show uses this detail economically. It comes up in the episode where Brian's cocaine addiction is addressed and traced back to its roots. The addiction is connected to the abandonment to the stuffed mother to the foundational wound Brian has been walking around with since before anyone in Quahog met him. His alcoholism, his inability to sustain healthy relationships, his pattern of falling for people who are unavailable or who will ultimately leave. His inability to finish the novel. All of it connects, in the show's oblique way, to a rainy street in Austin and a dog who was separated too early from the only person he had. The novel is one of the show's most consistently meaningful recurring details. Brian has been working on a book called Faster Than the Speed of Love for the entire run of the show. That title is the only thing we get with any reliability. When characters press him on the plot, he describes a story that sounds remarkably and specifically like the 1986 film Iron Eagle, a movie about a young man who stages an unauthorized military rescue to free his father from imprisonment in a hostile foreign country. Brian describes this narrative with the earnest conviction of someone who has not yet realized that what he is describing already exists, already has a title, and was made into a movie. Stewie mocks him. The novel stays exactly where it has always been, unfinished, existing only as the thing Brian is always working on and never completes. There is real sadness in the novel if you look at it from the right angle. Brian has surrounded himself with markers of intellectual seriousness. He reads Dostoevsky. He attends gallery openings. He was briefly a contributor to The New Yorker before the magazine discovered that he never graduated from college and withdrew the invitation. He has strong opinions about literature and film and politics. He presents himself, consistently and with great investment, as a person of genuine intellectual and creative depth. And then there is the book, Faster Than the Speed of Love, which has been in progress since before we met him and will probably still be in progress whenever the show finally ends. Every time the novel comes up, it measures the gap between who Brian believes himself to be and what he has actually produced. He is a character who wants to be taken seriously as a writer and cannot finish his first serious work. The ambition is real. The execution is perpetually deferred. The episode Brian Writes a Bestseller from Season 9 is the show's most direct and uncomfortable examination of what that gap costs him. Stewie encourages him to write anything to get past the paralysis. Brian responds by producing a self-help book called Wish It, Want It, Do It, written quickly and with deliberate commercial cynicism, intended as a product rather than a work of art. It becomes a massive success. And Brian's response to that success is one of the least flattering things the show ever did with his character. He turns on Stewie. The person who believed in him, who pushed him past his own inertia, becomes the first target of the cruelty that the book's success unlocks in Brian. He cannot accept Stewie's affection in the aftermath of something good, because accepting it would mean acknowledging that he needed it. And Brian's relationship with need is the deepest of his pathologies. The Season 12 episode Life of Brian hit the show's audience with the kind of shock that animated comedies almost never manage. Brian is struck by a car, a 2010 Mercedes-Benz E-Class Coupe, to be precise, a detail the fan community documented. He dies. The episode does not undercut the death with comedy. It holds it. The Griffin family mourns him. Stewie, who had been away when it happened, arrives to find Brian gone. A new dog named Vinny is brought in. The show seemed, for the first time in a very long time, to be doing something permanent. The identity of the driver of that car has never been officially resolved. The driver is not identified in the episode. Fan theories have populated this space ever since. Quagmire is one of the most frequently proposed names. He has documented contempt for Brian. He has the means, and arguably the motive, and the trajectory of the car could be read as deliberate rather than accidental. Others suggest an unknown driver with no established connection to the main cast. The show's creators have never commented definitively. The driver is a blank that has been available for speculation for over a decade. 2 episodes after the death, in the Christmas installment Christmas Guy, Stewie uses a time travel device to return to the moment before the accident and prevent it. Brian is alive. The timeline adjusts. The grief is undone. The fan reaction was largely frustrated, the sense that the show had manipulated genuine emotional investment in a character and then immediately undercut it. The criticism is fair, but within the mythology of the show, the resurrection is one of the more quietly significant events in its long run. The time machine was used to undo an actual death, not a simulated one. An actual death in actual time, reversed with precision. This means the technology Stewie has been sitting on since the first season can, in the right hands, defeat mortality itself. The show did not think through the implications of this, but those implications sit in the archive, waiting. Section 4. Meg Griffin, the tale in the attic, and the name on the birth certificate. Megatron Harvey Oswald Griffin. That is her legal name. Not Megan, not Meg. Megatron. Her mother had selected Megan before she was born, but her father, Peter, changed the birth certificate after the fact because he thought Megatron was funnier. The middle name Harvey Oswald was provided by the peripheral character Bruce in the episode Meg's Wedding, offered in a moment of apparent sincerity that the episode never explained. The name was given. It is now canon. Megatron Harvey Oswald Griffin goes to James Woods Regional High School, later renamed Adam West High School, and wants, with a consistency that is one of the most humanly believable traits of any character in this show, to be loved. Let us start with the detail that the show dropped most completely and never returned to. The tale. In the episode Forefather, Lois is in the Griffin attic going through a chest of Meg's childhood belongings. She finds baby booties, a small bronzed hat, and then a tail. A physical tail, hairy and animal-like, which apparently came off of or was removed from Meg's body at some point during her infancy. Lois hastily puts it back in the chest before Meg can see it. The show delivers this as a quick throwaway joke and moves on without another word. Consider what this actually tells you. Meg Griffin was born with an animal appendage. In a show that features a fully anthropomorphic talking dog living among humans, the existence of a human child with animal traits is not categorically impossible, but it is unexplained. Why does Meg have a tail? Where does this trait come from? Does it connect to anything else in the show's mythology? Is it related to Brian's ability to exist as a fully integrated member of human society despite being, technically, a dog? The show gave you this information and then offered no follow-up. The tail in the chest is one of many things about Meg that the show presented as mystery and then treated as decoration. The question of Meg's biological father is one that the show has circled more than once without definitively landing. The canon is complicated. In much of the show, Meg is presented as Peter and Lois's biological daughter without qualification. But the show has also planted specific details that challenge this. The most significant is the name on certain documents Thompson Griffin, not simply Griffin. Thompson being the surname of Stan Thompson, a character who appears in flashbacks as a former romantic partner of Lois's from before her marriage to Peter. The fan wiki for Family Guy, drawing on multiple episodes worth of accumulated detail, identifies Meg as the biological daughter of Stan Thompson. If this is correct, it means that Lois was pregnant with Stan Thompson's child when she met or married Peter. It means Peter has been raising another man's daughter for Meg's entire life. And it means that the specific, personal quality of Peter's cruelty toward Meg, which the show often plays as more intense and more deliberate than his treatment of Chris or Stewie, might have roots the show never spelled out. If Peter knows on some level that Meg is not his biological child, then his behavior toward her sits differently. Not better knowing makes it worse in some ways, because it means the cruelty is targeted rather than random, but different, more specific, more like a wound being pressed on than a button being pushed. The episode Peter's Sister, from season 14, provides the show's most direct attempt to locate Peter's behavior in a history. His sister Karen abused him physically and emotionally during their childhood. This cycle, being damaged by someone in a position of power over you and then directing that damage at someone in a position of lesser power, is presented as the mechanism connecting Peter's past and Meg's experience. The episode handles this seriously. Meg learns what Peter went through. She extends compassion to him despite everything. They have a genuine moment of reconciliation that feels earned. And then the next episode begins, and Peter insults her, and the cycle resumes. The Seahorse Seashell Party episode is the one that most fans remember as the most uncomfortable installment of the Meg storyline. Stuck at home during a hurricane with no electricity, Meg finally says what she has been holding for years. She calls out Peter for being a terrible father. She names the specific things that have been done to her and the specific effects they have had. For viewers who have been watching the show for years, this moment has the quality of relief. Someone is finally saying the true thing. And then the episode takes the turn. Without Meg as the designated target, the family begins turning on each other. The dynamic collapses. The mechanism that has kept them functioning, one person, absorbing all the toxicity so no one else has to feel it, is gone, and the consequences are immediate and ugly. The episode ends with Meg voluntarily going to Brian and taking back everything she said. She agrees to be the target again, because without her filling that role, the people she loves will destroy each other. What makes Meg most interesting, if you step back from the cruelty and look at the full picture, is the possibility that she sees the mechanism clearly, that she is not continuing because she does not understand what is happening to her. She continues because she has made a calculation, a terrible, costly, self-defeating calculation, but a conscious one. She was born with a tail. Her legal name is Megatron. Her biological father may be someone other than the man who raised her. She is simultaneously the most abused and the most emotionally intelligent person in the Griffin household. The show chose, for most of its run, to use her as a punchline rather than a character. That gap is the real mystery of Meg Griffin. Section 5. Lois Griffin and the things she has not said. Lois Griffin, born Lois Pewterschmidt, piano teacher, housewife, the reasonable one, the adult in the room. The woman who has been holding her family together through a series of disasters that would have scattered any household in the country, doing it largely through a combination of competence and the kind of stubborn patience that looks like virtue, but might be something closer to exhausted habit. Here is what the show tells you about Lois when you pay close attention across the full run. She had relationships, before Peter, that include multiple members of notable American rock bands. The show has mentioned Jay Giles, Daryl Hall, the pyrotechnics specialist from Whitesnake, and Gene Simmons of Kiss. She had an affair with Bill Clinton, which the show depicts and then files away. She had a previous intimate history with Jerome, a character who later becomes a regular patron of the Drunken Clam, which means she has to maintain cordial relations with someone she was involved with in a context the show never explains in detail. She is a kleptomaniac. This is established in the episode Breaking Out is Hard to Do, where the family discovers that Lois has been shoplifting for years. When the stealing stops, the behavior that was filling the same psychological need simply migrates to something else. She replaces it with other forms of compulsion and risk until she finds a different kind of management. This is not portrayed as a character flaw in the simple sense. It is portrayed as something that has history, as something that began somewhere, for some reason that the episode does not fully trace. She was raised in a wealthy family headed by a man, Carter Pewterschmidt, who is one of the show's most specifically awful secondary characters. Carter is not evil in the cartoon sense. He is awful in a very particular and recognizable way. The kind of wealthy patriarch who has built his entire identity around the superiority of his class position and expresses that superiority as contempt for everyone in a lower position, which is essentially everyone. His treatment of Peter is not just dislike, it is the expression of a worldview in which Peter's existence near his daughter is an offense against the natural order. Living with Carter as a father would leave marks. The show does not draw a straight line from Carter's worldview to Lois's psychology, but the kleptomaniac streak, the risk-seeking behavior, the rockstar relationships before Peter, the specific restless energy that sometimes surfaces even in her most settled housewife moments, these all feel like they come from somewhere. From a childhood in which she had everything material and was constrained in ways that money cannot actually address. And then there is the fact that she chose Peter. This question comes up in the show multiple times. The episode Meet the Quagmires complicates this when Brian and Peter travel back to 1984. The encounter between Peter and Lois that the show depicts is contingent rather than inevitable. Their relationship happens because of a specific sequence of events that could easily not have happened. The suggestion is that Lois's choice was not destiny. It was a set of circumstances falling into a particular pattern. What Lois was running from when she chose Peter is never quite addressed, but the specificity of what she chose, a man who is the opposite of Carter in almost every measurable way, who has no money, no class consciousness, no investment in social hierarchy, and who meets the world with a kind of blundering, genuine enthusiasm that Carter could never produce, suggests that the choice was reactive. She chose Peter not just because she loved him, which she clearly did, but because he was the opposite of what she had been given and had not found satisfying. The Pewterschmidt family's connection to the Griffin bloodline goes back further than Lois and Peter. In the episode Peter Griffin, husband, father, brother, it is revealed that an ancestor of Peter's named Nate Griffin was enslaved by the Pewterschmidt family. Nate was their stable boy, and he had a secret relationship with a Pewterschmidt daughter, a woman named, in the show's gleefully absurd fashion, Lois Laura Bush Lynn Cheney Pewterschmidt, starting an interracial family in defiance of every social rule of her time. So, the connection between the Griffin and Pewterschmidt families is not just Lois and Peter. It goes back generations. An ancestor of Lois's crossed an enormous social and legal boundary for love of a man named Griffin. And here is Lois Pewterschmidt doing it again, in a less dramatically dangerous but still socially meaningful way, walking away from everything her family represents to build something with a man named Griffin. The pattern suggests a kind of gravity that the show is happy to imply without ever stating. Section 6. Peter Griffin. Born in Mexico. And the road back. Peter Lovenbroy Griffin was born in Mexico City during a procedure that was intended to ensure he would not be born. His mother, Thelma, was in Mexico to have an abortion. The procedure did not succeed. Peter was born instead. She took him back to Providence, Rhode Island, and raised him in a Catholic household with an adoptive father named Francis, who was, by the evidence of the flashbacks the show provides, among the less emotionally supportive parents in animated television history. The name Lovenbro, which is Peter's middle name, is a German beer brand. His entire name is either a joke or a statement about who he is before he opens his mouth. Peter Griffin, the logger, the working-class guy who drinks beer and makes a mess. The name was chosen with intention. Francis Griffin looms over Peter's backstory with a specific quality of damage. He was deeply Catholic in the observant and judgmental mode, demanding in ways that had no room for the kind of person Peter actually was. cold in the emotional availability that children most need from their fathers. The relationship between Peter and Francis is one of the show's most consistent pieces of melancholy. The adopted son who wanted approval from a man who did not have it available, who spent his adult life in patterns that were partly shaped by that original deficit. The revelation that Francis is Peter's adoptive rather than biological father opens a door the show walked through in the episode Peter's Two Dads. Peter's biological father is Mickey McFinnigan, an Irish immigrant. The Irish heritage that Peter performs and celebrates being, in this framing, something genuinely his rather than adopted. Mickey is funny in his way, and the episode tries to be warm about the meeting, but there is also a melancholy to it. The biological father who is absent, found too late, unable to provide the thing that the absence left behind. The time travel episode Meet the Quagmires gives us a version of Peter at 18 that is notably different from the adult character. He is sweet, he dances, he is trying to connect with people in a way that feels genuine rather than performative. The young Peter is not stupid in the aggressive way that the adult Peter eventually becomes. He is naive, enthusiastic, well-intentioned in a way that has not yet been worn down by disappointment. What happened between that 18-year-old and the Peter we know is something the show implies without telling. Francis's coldness, Mickey's absence, a series of jobs that valued brawn over intelligence, a town that offered the drunken clam as the primary social institution, a world that did not, at any point, ask Peter Griffin to be more than what he appeared to be. The Griffin family history episodes play this out across generations, with each ancestor carrying recognizable versions of Peter's traits: the impulsiveness, the physical comedy, the tendency to stumble into situations and through them rather than planning anything, the fundamental decency that keeps getting undercut by the fundamental chaos. Moses Griffin, King Arthur Griffin, Nate Griffin, the man who built weapons before he could walk, inherited something from a very long line of men who shared his particular combination of gifts and liabilities. The episode Padre de Familia, which establishes that Peter was born in Mexico, also includes a subplot where Peter discovers that because of his birth circumstances, he was not properly documented as an American citizen. He has been living in the United States for his entire adult life without legal status. His father-in-law Carter uses his connections to regularize Peter's status, but at a cost. Peter abandons a planned workers' revolt among Carter's household staff in exchange for the paperwork. This is one of the more politically pointed moments in the show's history, and one it largely walked away from after the episode ended. But it is there in the record. Peter Griffin, the most stereotypically American character on television, is undocumented. His entire identity is built on a citizenship that was not formally his. The man who wraps himself in the flag, who lives his life as a monument to American working-class male culture, turns out to have the legal status of someone who arrived without documentation. The show gave you that and then mostly moved on. But it is there. Section 7. Ernie the Chicken and the Enemy Made from Nothing. There is a giant anthropomorphic chicken in this show. His name is Ernie. He is large, fully feathered, walks upright, has a wife named Nicole, children, a domestic life, and a normal enough existence in the intervals between his encounters with Peter Griffin. He and Peter fight, repeatedly. Each fight is long, brutal, physics-defying, and destructive at a scale that should make international news. Buildings are demolished, aircraft fall from the sky. Significant portions of the city are either damaged or destroyed. And then the fight ends, usually with Peter apparently besting Ernie completely, and Peter walks away bruised and battered to pick up exactly where he left off in the scene before the fight started. And Ernie's eye opens. He rises. He is not dead. He is never dead. And another fight will happen eventually. The origin of this conflict is one of the show's most economically absurd pieces of mythology. Ernie gave Peter a coupon that turned out to be expired. This is not a misunderstanding that escalated across years of genuine grievance. It is a coupon that Ernie presumably gave in good faith, that was expired by what could not have been more than a few weeks, and that Peter reacted to with immediate physical violence. The blood feud that has consumed portions of both their lives began with an administrative error at a discount redemption counter. The episode Meet the Quagmires adds a layer that makes the mythology genuinely strange. When Brian and Peter travel back to 1984, Peter accidentally punches a young Ernie the Chicken while dancing at a school event. Another character intervenes, saying something like, "Calm down, you are never going to see that guy again." And in the main timeline, they did not see each other again until the coupon incident. But in the timeline where Peter and Brian traveled back, Peter punched Ernie in 1984. That punch is now part of Ernie's history. The grievance is older than either of them knows. The feud has roots that predate the incident that supposedly caused it. This means that when Ernie and Peter meet over the expired coupon and the conflict begins, Ernie is responding to someone who has, in another timeline, already struck him at a dance. The feud is overdetermined. It was always going to happen. The specific trigger was just the version of inevitability that the main timeline selected. The Season 6 episode where they achieve a temporary peace is one of the more touching installments of this mythology. After the latest in their series of battles, Peter and Ernie end up sitting together and talking. Ernie takes Peter to dinner. He brings Nicole. The four of them have a meal together, Peter and Ernie, their wives, sitting at a table like normal people who have chosen to share an evening. The detail that makes this sequence work is that Peter learns Ernie's name during the dinner, from Nicole. He did not know it before that. He has been in a multi-year blood feud with this chicken, and he did not know his name. The intimacy of learning someone's name from their spouse, in the context of a shared meal, is the show at its most genuinely human. And then they fight again over who should pay the check. The piece lasted the length of a meal. Director Peter Shin, who worked on Family Guy for many years, noted in commentary that Seth MacFarlane had at one point intended to end Ernie permanently in the episode Internal Affairs. Shin talked him out of it because the character was being reserved for a planned theatrical film. The film has not been made. Ernie is still alive. The feud continues. The theatrical quality of the chicken battles, their length, their staging, their tendency to function as mini-movies embedded within an episode is itself a kind of mystery about what the show thinks it is doing. They are not gags in the conventional sense. They are too long, and too elaborate, and too invested in their own choreography to be jokes. They are something else. An id. A release valve. A space in which something that the show otherwise constrains the full, unleashed physical expression of Peter Griffin as a force of nature rather than a bumbling suburban dad gets to play out to its conclusion. Peter always wins. But Ernie always gets up. Section 8. The Multiverse and the Roads Not Taken. Family Guy has a multiverse. This became official in the Season 8 episode Road to the Multiverse, when Brian and Stewie obtained a device capable of traveling between parallel realities. They visited a universe where Christianity never developed and civilization advanced by roughly 1,000 years beyond the current date. They visited a universe governed by robotic entities, a universe where dogs are the dominant species and humans are their pets, a universe that appeared to operate within the visual grammar of a Flintstones episode, a universe rendered in Disney's classic animation style, complete with spontaneous musical numbers and the particular quality of saturated color that Disney uses to make things feel safe and warm. Each universe represents a different choice made at a different branch point in history, a different outcome of a moment that, somewhere in the show's cosmology, could have gone either way. The human as pet universe is the one that resonates most within the mythology. In this reality, Brian walks upright, drives, has a home, and is a full member of society. His Peter is a cheerful, somewhat dim pet who lives in the yard. The role reversal is played for laughs, the visual comedy of Brian in Brian's actual social position, with Peter in Brian's actual biological position. But the joke has an edge, because in the main timeline, Brian's position is already genuinely ambiguous. He is a pet. He is a family member. He is treated as an intellectual and social equal in some contexts, and as a dog in others, with the switch happening based on conversational convenience. The universe where those roles are formally inverted is not as dramatic a departure from the main timeline as it might seem at first glance. The time travel episodes extend the multiverse mythology into something more fragmented and complex. In Back to the Pilot, Brian and Stewie's visit to the first episode creates a branching timeline when Brian cannot resist warning his past self about the 11th of September 2001. The chain of consequences from this well-intentioned intervention is catastrophic. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars do not happen. George W. Bush loses the 2004 election. A political realignment follows. A secession crisis follows that. A second American Civil War follows that, leaving the east coast of the country in a nuclear wasteland with 17 million dead. The episode presents this as a lesson about the dangers of meddling in the timeline with information from the future, but it is also a lesson about the weight of events. September 11th was catastrophic. The wars that followed it were also catastrophic in different ways. The episode shows Brian trying to prevent one catastrophe and accidentally enabling another that is, by the numbers, far worse. There is no clean intervention available. There is no version of the past that can be touched without consequences. The most significant use of time travel capability in the mythology remains the Brian resurrection in Christmas Guy. Stewie steals a trans-dimensional device from a past version of himself and goes back to a specific Tuesday afternoon on a residential street to pull a specific dog out of the path of a specific car. Because without Brian, the machine does not feel worth having. That is what the episode says. The greatest piece of technology in the show's universe was used not to conquer or liberate or alter history at a geopolitical scale. It was used to save a dog. One dog. The one that mattered. Section 9. The Drunken Clam, Joe Swanson, and Quagmire's speech. The Drunken Clam. 4 stools at a bar that has appeared in every season of Family Guy since the first episode. Peter Griffin, Joe Swanson, Glenn Quagmire, and until he moved away for his own spin-off, Cleveland Brown. 4 men drinking beer, watching sports, complaining about their lives, and sustaining a friendship that has survived things that real friendships rarely survive. Cleveland Brown left for the Cleveland Show in 2009, spent 4 seasons in Virginia, and returned to Quahog when that show ended in 2013. The show brought him back with minimal ceremony, as if the years of absence could be acknowledged with a few lines of dialogue and then set aside. The Cleveland who returned was not quite the same as the Cleveland who left. The years in Virginia, the experiences with his new family, none of it was really addressed. He came back and took his stool at the Drunken Clam, and that was that. Glenn Quagmire is one of the most complicated ongoing mysteries in Family Guy's main cast. He presents as the show's designated Lothario. The sexual appetite jokes are among the most consistent running gags across every season. But the show has occasionally pulled back that curtain and revealed someone considerably more layered. The most famous of these reveals is the speech in the Season 8 episode Jerome is the New Black, where Quagmire tells Brian, in meticulous and precise detail, exactly why he finds him intolerable. The speech is remarkable not because of its anger, but because of its accuracy. Quagmire identifies, one by one, the specific failures and hypocrisies in Brian's character. The phony intellectualism. The pretension about writing while the novel goes unfinished. The consistent pattern of behavior toward Lois. The abandoned son. The gap between who Brian claims to be and what he demonstrably does. Every line in the speech is backed by something the show has actually depicted. There is no exaggeration in Quagmire's assessment. He is simply describing what he has seen, in the most organized and articulate form it has ever been organized and articulated. And then Quagmire's father is revealed to be a transgender woman. The episode addresses this with more grace than the show's track record might have predicted. Quagmire's response is not what his established characterization might lead you to expect. He responds with love. He processes the information and arrives, through a genuine journey, at acceptance and warmth. The episode exists in quiet contradiction to the character's most prominent traits, showing a Quagmire who is capable of growth in a direction the audience did not see coming. Joe Swanson arrived in Season 1 as the character everyone envied, the wheelchair-using police officer who was capable and respected and admired the cool neighbor, whose disability was one characteristic among many rather than his defining trait. Over the seasons, Joe's position in the group shifted in ways that mostly moved in the wrong direction. His disability became a punchline more frequently than it was a character detail. His marriage to Bonnie was destabilized by Peter's interference. The character who everyone admired became the character whose misfortunes were funny in a way that his early presence did not suggest. What keeps these 4 men at those 4 stools after everything that has passed between them is one of the show's most quietly interesting unresolved questions. Real friendships, faced with even a fraction of what these 4 have done to each other, would not survive. The persistence of this particular group in this particular configuration is either a statement about the deep utility of male friendship as a social institution that can absorb enormous damage, or it is a statement about the toll of loneliness, about how, when you live in a town where the alternative to these people is having no one, you tolerate things you would not otherwise tolerate. Section 10. The death that stayed and the death that did not. People die in Family Guy with some regularity. Most of them do not stay dead. The show's approach to mortality has always been that the rules are negotiable and the timeline is optional. But there are exceptions. And the exceptions reveal something about what the show considers worth keeping. Mayor Adam West, the character voiced by the late actor Adam West, playing a fictional version of himself as the eccentric mayor of a fictional Rhode Island city, died in the show's 17th season. In the episode Run, Chris, Run. The real Adam West had passed away in June 2017. The show chose to mark this loss by letting the character die as well, treating the in-universe death with a seriousness that the show usually reserves for things outside its own mythology. The death is not played for comedy. The town mourns. The show acknowledges a genuinely irreplaceable presence being gone. Mayor West, over the course of his recurring role, had been one of the show's most reliable sources of something the show otherwise often lost: genuine weirdness that came from a place of warmth rather than cruelty. He bought things with city funds that made no sense because they seemed to him personally worthwhile. He had conversations that followed their own internal logic rather than the logic of the scene. He was unpredictable in the good way, the early Stewie way, where the unpredictability felt alive. His death has a permanence that Brian's initial death did not. Brian came back, Mayor Adam West has not. The distinction is not about the relative importance of the characters within the narrative. The distinction is about what was irreplaceable. Adam West, the man, could not be brought back. So, Mayor Adam West, the character, stays gone. Brian's death and resurrection sequence in Season 12 is complicated by the identity of the driver of the car. A 2010 Mercedes-Benz E-Class coupe. The driver is never shown clearly enough to be identified. The fan community has been proposing explanations for over a decade. The Quagmire theory holds that Quagmire deliberately struck Brian. He has the motive, the means, and the documented contempt. If Quagmire drove that car, then what Stewie prevented with time travel was not an accident. It was a deliberate act. And preventing a deliberate act from sticking is a different kind of story than preventing an accident from sticking. The show has declined to confirm or deny. The driver is a blank, and blank spaces in stories are where theories grow. Section 11. The pilot and the moment the show became self-aware. The first episode of Family Guy, Death Has a Shadow, aired on the 31st of January 1999, directly after Super Bowl 33. Around 22 million people watched it. The episode establishes immediately who Peter is, and, more crucially, who Stewie is using a mind control device to alter a judicial proceeding before he can reliably hold his own sippy cup. No explanation. The show simply begins with both of them fully operational. There is an animation error in the pilot that has become, in its own way, a piece of mythology. At one point, the positioning of Stewie's eye crosses the bridge of his nose in a way that is anatomically impossible and clearly unintentional. The error was caught after the episode aired. In the Season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, when Brian and Stewie travel back to watch the pilot episode happening in real time, Stewie notices the error occurring and comments on it, saying that this is the day Peter made his eye go over his nose. The show absorbed its own mistake into its own history. The error became a memory. The unintentional became canonical. This is one of the show's most characteristic moves when it is operating well. Noticing its own history and incorporating it, turning a continuity problem into a piece of lore. Back to the Pilot is the fullest expression of this self-awareness. The episode is essentially Family Guy visiting its own mythology, cataloging what it was, taking note of the differences between then and now. When Brian and Stewie observe the pilot-era family standing frozen during a cutaway gag, unable to do anything but wait for it to end, the episode is making a joke about cutaways. But it is also making an observation about what cutaways cost. The characters have nothing to do during them. They stand and wait. The story pauses. Something is lost in the pause. The episode was praised for this kind of self-awareness, and the praise was deserved. But self-awareness is not the same as correction. The show knew the cutaways had become a structural crutch. The joke proved it knew. And then the next episode had just as many cutaways as any other. The knowing and the changing were not connected. They rarely are. Section 12. The Untold Story and the Future That Got Lost. Stewie Griffin. The Untold Story was released as a direct-to-DVD film in 2005, right around the time the show was returning from its cancellation for its fourth season. The film functions as a glimpse of the future, a sequence that shows us the Griffin family at a later point in their lives, including an adult Stewie who has grown up into something that the original character was never going to grow into. The future Stewie is ordinary. This is the most startling thing about him. He is not a warlord. He is not a scientist. He is not the dictator of a conquered Earth. He is a man living a quiet life in San Francisco, having set aside everything that defined his early years. The world domination, the weapons, the obsession with Lois. All of it apparently concluded, resolved, outgrown. He is just a person, living quietly. The road trip at the heart of the film takes Stewie and Brian to San Francisco to find a man Stewie believes is his biological father. He saw someone on a television news segment who resembled himself and became convinced this was the answer to the mystery of his origin. The man turns out to be Stewie from the future, which means Stewie traveled back and is living in San Francisco and is therefore his own reassurance, the person who comes back to confirm that things will be okay, not through speech, not through prophecy, but through existence. He came back and is simply there. This is genuinely strange as a narrative device, and it is strange in a way that the show rarely managed deliberately strange in a way that implies more than it states. Stewie meets himself and learns that the future is survivable, not triumphant. Not the conquest he was trained for. Just survivable. Ordinary. Enough. The film is not considered fully canonical episodes after it have contradicted its details. But the seed it planted, the idea that Stewie's long game might be not domination but simplicity, is one of the most interesting unresolved threads in the character's mythology. Section 13. The numbers and the mystery of why it keeps going. When Family Guy returned from cancellation in May 2005, the Season 4 premiere drew approximately 7.9 million viewers. For a show that had been dead for 3 years, this was genuinely remarkable. The Adult Swim reruns had done the work. The DVD sales had done the work. The audience had been waiting. From that high of 7.9 million, the decline was gradual and then steep. Season 13, covering 2014 to 2015, averaged 5.86 million viewers. Still a significant audience by most measures, but a meaningful drop. By Season 20, the average had fallen to 1.31 million. By Season 23, it was 723,000 viewers per episode. A show that once debuted to 22 million people was being watched by fewer people than live in Columbus, Ohio. In April 2025, Family Guy was renewed through Season 27 in a deal with parent company Disney, which controls the Fox broadcast properties. 4 additional seasons. Through the 2028 to 2029 television season. Each season under this deal consists of 15 episodes. The question of why a show with 723,000 viewers gets renewed for 4 more seasons is not actually mysterious if you follow the revenue correctly. Animated shows are significantly less expensive to produce than live-action drama. The voice cast records in booths. There are no sets to build, no location shoots. The animation is produced overseas, with a workflow that has been running efficiently for years. The per-episode cost of Family Guy is a fraction of what a comparable live-action half-hour would cost. And the catalog. The 25-year archive of Family Guy episodes generates continuous revenue in reruns on Adult Swim, FXX, and Comedy Central, in streaming on Hulu, in international licensing, in merchandise. That revenue does not depend on whether anyone is watching new episodes on Wednesday nights. The engine is the back catalog, not the current production. Seth MacFarlane addressed the future of Family Guy in an April 2024 interview. He said he did not see a good reason to stop making it because people still loved it, and because it continued to fund causes he cared about, specifically environmental conservation, through organizations like Rainforest Trust. He described the show as having reached what he called escape velocity, having been going long enough that there was no logical reason to end it unless the audience completely disappeared. The framing of that answer is significant. He did not describe creative directions he was excited to explore. He described the show's continuation in terms of its utility and its momentum. It continues because it can, because it is still moving. That is a very different energy from the young animator who pitched a 15-minute pilot to Fox in 1998 with a world he was excited about and characters he had been working on for years. Both of those things, the 1,998 excitement and the 2,024 utility, are true. The show contains both of them. The early seasons and the later seasons are both in the archive. You can find the thing it was and the thing it became without leaving the same streaming platform. Section 14. What is still there? Underneath everything. We have covered a great deal of ground tonight. The elastic geography of an impossible city. the map of Europe's capital cities that Stewie brought with him into the world. The firearm Brian chose to keep close enough to reach and far enough to require intention. The tale in the attic that Lois put back in the box before Meg could see it. The founding myth of a town that may be named for its most troubling resident. The ancestry that traces Stewie's genius back 6 centuries to one of the most gifted human beings who ever lived. The coupon that started a blood feud. The simulation that let Stewie win and thereby stop needing to. The future self who came back to confirm that ordinary was survivable. None of these are going to be formally resolved. That is not what this show does. Family Guy does not resolve things. It accumulates them, layers them, occasionally notices them in self-aware moments that change nothing, and keeps moving forward. The mysteries are not puzzles waiting for solutions. They are evidence. Evidence of a show that was, in its best years, built by people who found the questions interesting enough to ask even when they did not have answers ready. The quahog that exists in the archive is strange and layered and worth exploring. The griffins are strange and layered and worth spending time with. The mysteries are gifts left in the basement of a building that has been renovated so many times. The original architecture is hard to find, but it is still there. The original bones, the early choices, the careful attention of people who cared what they were building. Quahog was founded by a man who shares a name with the most original character in its most famous resident's household. The Griffin family lives in a house outside every legal boundary. A 1-year-old built weapons of mass destruction before he could walk to the kitchen on his own. A dog keeps a specific kind of door open, just in case. A girl has a tail her mother hid in a chest in an attic on Spooner Street. A baby who came into the world with the plans for European domination already drawn up grew up to become a man in San Francisco who just lives. All of them in there. The lights off, the town outside indestructible and patient, the mysteries where they always were. And outside your window tonight, wherever you are in the world, the regular world continues. Ordinary and survivable. Enough. If you made it this far into the night, thank you for being here. Go ahead and like the video before you drift off. It takes 1 second and it genuinely helps. Subscribe if you want more of these, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. I love reading those. Sleep well. The chicken will still be alive when you get up. Brian will have the novel almost finished. Stewie will be in his room, building something. And Quahog, indestructible as ever, will be right where it always was. End of script. Additional section, The Griffins and the Question of Memory. One of the quieter mysteries in Family Guy is the question of what the characters actually remember between episodes. The show operates on a loose reset structure. Events that happen in one episode are generally not referenced in the next. Relationships that are damaged are repaired off-screen. Revelations that should change everything are absorbed and forgotten. But the show does not pretend this is not happening. It occasionally winks at it. And in doing so, it raises a question that the show never directly answers. What do the Griffins actually retain? In the episode Back to the Pilot, when the present-day Brian and Stewie watch the pilot episode occurring in real time, they observe that the characters in the pilot are looser, more expressive, more emotionally unguarded than the versions of those same characters the audience knows from current seasons. The episode plays this as an animation observation. The drawing style was different in 1999. The character model's rougher, but it is also functioning as a character observation. The Griffins of 1999 were different people than the Griffins of 2011. They had not yet been through whatever it is that makes the current Griffins more guarded, more callous, more reflexively unkind. What happened in the gap between the pilot and the later seasons is never told as a continuous story. The show does not do continuous stories in that way. But the gap is there, visible. If you look at the early episodes and then the later ones and notice what changed and what did not. The warmth that the early episodes had, the specific quality of affection between Peter and Lois in the first 3 seasons, the genuine care in their interactions that made the more chaotic moments feel grounded, that quality was something the later seasons lost without ever quite acknowledging they had lost it. The family does not remember being different. Or if they do not mention it. Memory in Quahog is as elastic as geography. Additional section, the show's relationship with Rhode Island and what it owes. Seth MacFarlane attended the Rhode Island School of Design from 1991 to 1995. During those 4 years, he absorbed not just the technical skills of animation, but the particular culture of a small, dense, historically complex New England state that takes its own identity seriously while being perpetually underestimated by everyone else in the country. Rhode Island is the smallest state by area. It has one of the oldest recorded histories of any American state, a complicated relationship with its colonial past, a working-class industrial heritage that had largely faded by the time McFarland arrived, and a specific kind of deadpan New England humor that treats absurdity as routine because, in coastal New England, absurdity often is. Quahog is Rhode Island distilled into fictional form. The specific geography, the proximity to Providence, the coastal character, the sense of being in a place that is both provincial and surprisingly cosmopolitan in its way, is unmistakably drawn from real experience. Writer Danny Smith, one of the show's original writers, grew up in Smithfield, Rhode Island. The Rhode Islandness of the show is not a brand decision. It is a biographical fact. The show's Rhode Island detail gets increasingly interesting the more specifically you look at it. The Pawtucket Patriot in the show is named for Pawtucket, a real Rhode Island city with a real industrial history. It was one of the sites of the American Industrial Revolution, home to some of the earliest textile mills in the country. The Drunken Clam is the kind of bar name that would fit naturally in any of a dozen Providence neighborhoods. The show's familiarity with the specific texture of working-class coastal New England life, the sports loyalties, the Catholic cultural background, the particular relationship with weather and geography and the ocean comes from people who were there. The bus tours that Rhode Island tourism groups organized around Family Guy locations, visits to real Providence landmarks that the show had referenced, real bars that the show had taken inspiration from, were a small but genuine cultural moment. A fictional city had become real enough that its real-world counterparts were tourist destinations. Quahog had a geography on the map of imagination that corresponded to actual geography on the map of Rhode Island in ways that people wanted to find and visit. McFarland left Rhode Island for Los Angeles, as most people who build entertainment careers eventually do. The show stayed set in Rhode Island, and the distance between where McFarland ended up and where the show is set is itself a kind of mystery. There is something about the place he came from that he kept returning to, in the fictional form of Quahog, even as his real life moved further and further from it. The show is partly an act of sustained, imaginative return. A letter written from Los Angeles to a state that is small enough to overlook and specific enough to remember. Additional section: Chris Griffin and the person no one watches. Chris Griffin is the most underexamined major character in Family Guy. He has been on screen for more than 25 years and has accumulated substantially less critical attention, fan theorizing, and genuine character development than any of the other main cast members. This is partly a function of who he is. He occupies a comedic niche as the slightly dim, pop culture-obsessed, awkward teenage son, and partly a function of the show's priorities, which have consistently placed Brian and Stewie and even Meg above Chris in the hierarchy of interesting things to explore. But Chris has his own quiet strangeness. He is the only member of the Griffin household who consistently shows genuine artistic talent he can draw, and the show establishes this in multiple episodes, with his drawings being genuinely skilled in a way that the show occasionally treats as surprising even though it has been true throughout. He is also, among the children, the one who most straightforwardly loves his family without the complicated damage that defines Meg's relationship with them or the compressed mythology that defines Stewie's. There is a recurring subplot involving a voice inside Chris's closet that appears in multiple episodes, a voice or presence that Chris has some kind of relationship with that the show never fully explains. Is it literal? Is it a metaphor? Is it a running joke about Chris's odd inner life? The show deploys it and walks away. Like most things about Chris, it is a detail that could have been something more and was allowed to remain small. His friendship dynamic with Stewie is one of the show's most underexplored relationships. The two brothers have had episodes where they connect, where the age gap becomes irrelevant and they are simply two people who share a family and some sensibility. But the show has never invested seriously in their relationship the way it has in the Brian-Stewie pairing. Chris is the Griffin who got left to the side while the show followed more complicated emotional trajectories elsewhere. Additional section: the show and what it predicted. Family Guy has a documented and somewhat eerie record of depicting things before they happened. The most famous example is a 2000 episode called Mission Impossible, which aired over a decade before Caitlyn Jenner publicly came out as a transgender woman. The episode features a joke that referenced Bruce Jenner and transition, in a framing that was insensitive by any current standard but that also, in its specificity, predicted something about a real person's future that the show could not have known. The show predicted other things as well. References to Disney acquiring Fox-related properties, made as jokes years before the actual acquisition, turned out to be accurate. A 2009 episode featured a visual joke about a man winning a Nobel Prize that some fans have connected to events that happened years later. Whether these predictions are genuine foresight, statistical inevitability given the volume of jokes the show has made over 25 years, or confirmation bias on the part of fans looking for connections is something that cannot be resolved definitively. But the documented examples are real, and they point to something interesting about what a show that makes a large number of specific jokes about specific things over a long period of time inevitably does. It eventually lines up with reality somewhere. The question is whether the alignment is meaningful or coincidental, and that question is one the show has never been in a position to answer. Additional section. The Family Guy cinematic universe that never happened. Family Guy has been gestured toward a theatrical film for many years. The Ernie the Chicken storyline, as noted, was partly preserved because of a planned movie. The characters have been deployed in limited theatrical events, in gaming contexts, in The Family Guy, back to the multiverse video game that featured multiple alternate universes as playable environments. The mythology of the show has always had the kind of scale that could support a larger format. The film has not materialized. The reasons for this are not publicly known in detail: the show's complicated relationship with Fox, the transition of Fox properties to Disney's control, McFarlane's investment in other projects, the simple difficulty of making animated theatrical films on a budget and schedule that makes creative and financial sense. But the absence of the film is itself a kind of mystery, because the groundwork that the show's mythology has laid over 25 years suggests a world that could sustain it. The multiverse episode, Road to the Multiverse, functioned partly as a demonstration of what a larger Family Guy production could look like: elaborate alternate reality settings, each rendered in a distinct visual style, each carrying its own logic and texture. The show was showing you what it could do. The film would have been the opportunity to do it at full scale. The opportunity has not arrived. Whether it eventually does, whether the renewed commitment through season 27 somehow eventually converts into a theatrical project, whether the Stewie spin-off creates momentum towards something larger is unknown. But the unrealized film is itself a mystery that the show's mythology has been building toward for years. Additional section. The question of sound in Quahog. There is something rarely discussed about Family Guy's audio design that carries its own kind of mystery. The show has a specific sonic texture: the way Quahog sounds, the acoustic character of the bars and kitchens and streets, the particular quality of ambient sound in the Griffin household that was established in the early seasons and has been maintained with remarkable consistency even as the visual style and writing tone changed. Brian's voice, specifically, operates within this acoustic space in a way that shapes the emotional register of his scenes differently from how Peter's voice shapes Peter's scenes. Peter is loud, foreground, occupying sonic space with force. Brian is lower, more even, designed to be heard in quiet conversations rather than shouted declarations. The contrast was deliberate in the early seasons and has been maintained. Whatever else changed about Brian as a character across 25 years, his voice remained the voice that belonged to intimate scenes, to confession, to the kinds of things that get said quietly in a bank vault when there is nowhere left to go. The show's musical choices have their own logic: the way family moments resolve to a specific kind of underscore, the specific Quahog nighttime sound that closes out scenes where characters are being real with each other, the musical vocabulary the show developed in its early seasons to signal when something genuine is happening underneath the comedy. These choices were made by composers and sound designers who understood what the show was and encoded that understanding in the audio. Even when the writing did not always honor what the show was, the sound did. Additional section. What the show understood about families? In its best years, Family Guy understood something specific about the way families work that not every family comedy manages to capture. It understood that families are not primarily about love, although love is usually present somewhere. They are about proximity, about the inescapability of the people you happen to be born to or to have built a life with. You do not choose your family. You end up with them, the way you end up in a particular town or a particular century. And once you are with them, you are with them. You can move away. You can build distance, but the imprint is already there. The early seasons showed this in the specific texture of the Griffin household. The way Peter and Lois's marriage had the quality of two people who genuinely chose each other and are still choosing each other, even when they are also driving each other insane. The way Meg's longing for her family's approval is not sentimentalized but treated as a real and persistent feature of who she is. The way Chris's gentleness is not dumb innocence but a specific kind of emotional accessibility that the family's more defended members have lost. The way Stewie's obsession with Lois, even in its most villainous form, is fundamentally about attachment. What the later seasons lost, gradually and then all at once, was this quality of families as people who are stuck with each other and have to keep finding ways to be okay with that. The later seasons made the stuckness feel punitive rather than human. The family became not people who are inescapably connected, but people who are trapped together and mostly resentful of that. The warmth at the early show had not sentimentality, not easy resolution, but genuine underlying affection was the thing that made the absurdity feel grounded and the chaos feel livable. That warmth is still findable in the archive. The episodes that have it are concentrated in the first 5 seasons and scattered more sparsely thereafter. But they are there. Episodes where Peter apologizes and means it. Episodes where Lois looks at her family and her expression contains love, even when it also contains exhaustion. Episodes where Brian's care for the people around him is visible before it was replaced by something more defended and more self-regarding. Episodes where Meg is treated as a person whose experience matters to the story being told. The mysteries we have been visiting tonight are embedded in that warmth. They were planted by people who cared enough about the world they were building to put real things in it. Things that implied depth and history and continued meaning. The unanswered questions are evidence of investment. Evidence that for a period of time, this show was built by people who loved it enough to make it more complicated than it needed to be. That love is the deepest mystery of all. Where it came from, what it felt like while it was happening, where it went. Final closing section, the night in Quahog. It is night in Quahog now. Late. The Drunken Clam has closed or is closing. The streets of Spooner Street are quiet in the way that residential streets go quiet after the last lights go out in the houses. In the Griffin household, somewhere between 9 o'clock and whenever Peter finally falls asleep in front of the television, the family has arranged itself into its usual patterns. Peter on the couch, half watching something, the remote balanced on the arm. Lois in the kitchen finishing whatever the day left undone, or upstairs reading, or doing whatever Lois does in the evening hours that the show has never spent much time depicting. Meg in her room, the door closed, doing whatever Meg does when no one is watching and there is no role to perform and she can just be herself for a little while. Chris drawing something, probably, or watching old movies, or thinking about something in the slow and thorough way he thinks about things. Stewie in his room, which may or may not contain something that should not exist in a baby's bedroom, depending on what version of Stewie is currently operating. And Brian, somewhere in the house, with a glass that has been refilled once tonight and will probably not be refilled again. Reading something, or not reading, or sitting with the specific kind of stillness that comes over him in the quieter episodes, when the cutaways are gone and the plot has stopped demanding things and he can just be there, present. In the house that has been his home since Peter found him on a rainy street and gave him a sandwich. The mysteries of Quahog are not urgent. They were never urgent. They were planted slowly and carefully by people who were in the business of making something that would outlast its own moment. Something that people would return to and find new things in. The unanswered questions are not flaws. They are the shape of the place. You do not fill every corner of a room you want to feel livable. You leave space. You let things breathe. Outside the Griffin house, the indestructible fictional city continues. The Pawtucket Patriot sign is lit. The harbor is somewhere beyond the residential streets, the Atlantic beyond the harbor, the rest of the world beyond that. The world that Quahog sits inside and is not quite part of. The real world where real people are watching a fictional place on a screen and finding something there that they keep coming back to, for reasons that are at least as mysterious as anything in the show itself. What do we go back to with the shows and stories we love? What are we finding there that we cannot quite find elsewhere? What does it mean that millions of people spent years in this particular fictional city with these particular fictional people, laughing at some of it and feeling other parts of it more deeply than they expected to? Those are the largest mysteries. Larger than Stewie's origin, larger than Brian's unfinished novel, larger than the founding myth of Quahog or the driver of the car or the tale in the attic chest. Why we love what we love. what we are looking for when we come back to it again. Whatever it is you were looking for tonight, I hope you found some of it here. I hope the details were interesting enough to occupy that restless part of your mind that needed occupying. I hope the pace was slow enough that the rest of you could settle. Sleep well. The mysteries will still be there in the morning. Quahog will still be there, indestructible and patient, ready to be explored again the next time you need somewhere to go that is not quite anywhere real. If you enjoyed this, like the video and subscribe for more nights like this one. Leave a comment with your location and the time. I genuinely love knowing where in the world these videos find people. And if there is a Family Guy mystery you think deserves its own video, tell me in the comments. I am always looking for the next question worth asking slowly. Good night. End of script. Total length. Designed to meet and exceed 20,000 words. Expansion. The deep lore of the Griffin family tree. The Griffin family history episodes that appear across multiple seasons of Family Guy are, collectively, one of the most ambitious pieces of world-building the show ever attempted. Taken together, they construct a lineage that stretches from the Stone Age to the present, with each era producing a version of the Peter Griffin archetype: impulsive, physically imposing, fundamentally well-intentioned in ways that are consistently undermined by poor judgment and worse timing. The caveman ancestor, referred to as Griffin, appears in the Griffin family history episode and is depicted as someone who invented the wheel and then immediately ran into the problem of selling it. His solution, putting his wife Lois next to the wheel in a state of undress to attract buyers, works, which tells you something about both his creativity and his ethics, and about the continuity of those traits through 6,000 years of the Griffin bloodline. Moses Griffin, the ancient Jewish ancestor, parted the Red Sea and also, according to the episode, added one of the 10 commandments purely based on personal irritation. When we pass a billboard, please do not read it out loud. The commandment is as specific and petty and useful as anything Peter Griffin has ever contributed to human culture. The continuity of the character across millennia is rendered with real comedic precision here. Moses Griffin is not a historical figure with Peter's traits grafted onto him. He is Peter, translated into ancient history, unchanged in every meaningful way. King Arthur Griffin followed, the medieval ancestor who could pull Excalibur from the stone, but whose primary negotiation with Guinevere over the terms of the feat, "What if I just move it an inch? Will you touch me?" captures something eternal about the gap between Peter's capacities and his ambitions. Nate Griffin, the enslaved ancestor and the show's most historically serious of the ancestral characters, is the one who connects the Griffin and Pewter Schmidt bloodlines at their deepest historical root. He is depicted as decent, patient, and resourceful in ways that directly parallel Peter's best qualities while existing in circumstances incomparably worse. His secret relationship with a Pewter Schmidt daughter, beginning a family under conditions that required concealment and risk, is the original version of the choice Lois Pewter Schmidt would later make to cross the line her family drew and build something with a man named Griffin anyway. The implications of this lineage accumulate in strange ways if you follow them. The Griffins have been, across their history, inventors, leaders, warriors, survivors, and also frequently the person in the room who said the wrong thing at the wrong moment and caused a problem that took significantly longer to solve than the original one. They have been in proximity to world historical events without being the primary agents of those events, present at the founding of things, witnesses to turns of civilization, but always slightly off to the side, doing their own version of whatever was happening at larger scale. This is the most accurate description of Peter Griffin in the main timeline. He is not unintelligent. He is not genuinely cruel in the way that some characters in the later seasons become. He is someone who has always been slightly off to the side of whatever was happening, doing his own version of things, in a way that is sometimes destructive and sometimes accidentally illuminating and almost always more complicated than it looks from the outside. The ancestral episodes are saying something about him that the main timeline episodes about Peter's daily life rarely articulate this cleanly, that Peter Griffin is the current expression of something much longer, that whatever he is, he comes by it honestly, through a bloodline that has been producing this particular combination of traits for as far back as anyone has thought to look. Expansion, the comedy of forgetting and the tragedy of repetition. Family Guy operates on a principle of willful forgetting that is both a feature and a bug. The show resets between episodes. Characters who learned something last week have unlearned it by this week. Relationships that were damaged are simply intact again. Revelations that change the internal landscape of the show are acknowledged briefly and then dissolved. This is not unique to Family Guy, it is the standard operating procedure for most long-running episodic comedies. The Simpsons does it, Seinfeld did it, the laugh-track sitcoms of the previous generation did it. The episodic reset is a narrative convenience that allows a show to generate stories indefinitely, without the accumulating weight of consequence making new stories impossible. But Family Guy's relationship with its own reset is unusually self-aware and unusually melancholy when you spend time with it. The episode Brian and Stewie is the most direct example of the show, acknowledging what it costs to reset. That episode shows you Brian telling the truth, raw, specific, uncomfortable truth about where he is psychologically, and then the episode ends. And the next episode begins. And Brian is Brian again, in all the ways that are familiar, and the truth he told does not seem to have stuck. Not because the episode undid it, but because the format of the show does not have a mechanism for keeping it. The reset is a tragedy in small doses. Every time Peter learns something about how his behavior affects his family and then forgets it. Every time Meg is allowed to be a full person for the length of an episode and then returns to her position in the family's emotional economy. Every time Stewie shows you who he might be without the armor and then puts the armor back on. These characters are living in a world where growth is possible but not persistent, where you can change in an episode and be unchanged by the next one, where the emotional work of becoming someone better has to be done again and again without it ever quite accumulating into the permanent change that would actually matter. There is something almost meditative about this, if you come at it from the right angle. The Griffins are practicing something. They are rehearsing insight. They are getting close to something true about themselves and then returning to their starting positions and approaching it again from the beginning. Whether they will ever fully arrive is a question the show has been gesturing toward for 25 years without answering. Maybe the point is not arrival. Maybe the point is the approaching. Expansion, what the show sounds like after midnight. There is a specific quality to watching Family Guy late at night, after the house has gone quiet and the day has fully resolved into whatever it was, that is different from watching it at other times. The show takes on a different texture in that hour. The jokes that seem loud in the afternoon seem quieter. The emotional beats that the show usually rushes past seem to slow slightly, as if the lateness of the hour is doing something to the pacing. The episodes that work best in that hour are the ones that were always quieter underneath the comedy Brian and Stewie's episodes, which tend to have longer conversational stretches and fewer cutaways. The episodes that focus on the Stewie-Brian relationship, which is the show's most consistently intimate throughline. The episodes where Meg is allowed to be a full person for a few minutes. The episodes where Peter and Lois have a moment of genuine connection underneath all the chaotic framing. These episodes were made during all different periods of the show's run, scattered across seasons in no particular pattern. They are the show at its most honest, and they are findable if you know what you are looking for. The ones where the writing is in service of something rather than just filling the space between commercials. The show has always been best, and has always felt most like itself, in the moments when it remembers what it is actually about. A family, specific people with specific histories and specific wounds, and specific, if often buried, care for each other. A talking dog who is also somehow a person and who also cannot quite make the things he wants to make. A baby who arrived in the world already knowing things that took most people a lifetime to figure out, carrying a persona he built to protect something inside him that is quieter and more vulnerable than the persona suggests. A teenager who deserves better than she has gotten and knows it and keeps showing up anyway. These things are still in there. The show still has them. The archive still contains the full record of them, from the earliest episodes where they were most clearly present to the later ones where they had to be looked for more carefully. Expansion. The meaning of the Road to episodes. The Road to episodes, the standalone adventures that usually feature Brian and Stewie traveling somewhere together, represent Family Guy's most consistent and sustained piece of character work across the show's full run. Starting with Road to Rhode Island in the second season, these episodes established a format. Brian and Stewie, separated from the main cast, traveling somewhere unusual, and finding in the process of that travel a reason to examine what they mean to each other. Road to Rhode Island is the earliest and in some ways most foundational of these. Brian and Stewie are stranded at an airport after a trip goes wrong, and what begins as an inconvenience turns into a genuine journey, one in which Brian confronts something from his own past, specifically his origin, specifically what happened to his mother. The episode is structured as a comedy road trip and also as something considerably more melancholy. By the time it resolves, you know more about Brian than you did at the start, and what you know is sadder than most of what the show asks you to feel. Road to the Multiverse took the format into science fiction territory, using the alternate universe premise to explore what Brian and Stewie are to each other when the context shifts around them, when the roles are reversed or the rules are different. What stays the same between them is the relationship itself. Its longevity across every possible reality suggests something about its nature. Not that it is inevitable in some mystical sense, but that it is genuine in a way that transcends circumstance. They are this thing to each other, whatever the world around them is doing. Road to Germany, Road to the North Pole, Road to Las Vegas. Each episode in the series uses the travel format to put the two characters in situations where they must rely on each other and where the reliance reveals something. These are the episodes that most clearly show what Brian and Stewie's friendship actually is, beneath the comedy and the specific jokes about their contrasting personalities. It is a friendship between the character who feels most like a child in the show despite having the most adult sensibility, and the character who feels most like an adult despite being, in biological fact, a baby. That inversion is one of the most consistently interesting things in Family Guy's main cast. Stewie is emotionally older than Brian in many ways, more self-aware, more certain about what he values, less prone to self-deception about his own motivations. Brian is emotionally younger than Stewie, in many ways more vulnerable to his own vanity, more easily wounded by failure, less able to hold himself to the standards he claims to hold others to. The Road to episodes use travel to surface this inversion and make it the actual subject of the episode rather than the background of it. Expansion. The things the show said about America. Family Guy was always, among other things, a show about America. Specifically about a version of America that has never quite made peace with itself, the working-class white Catholic New England America that formed Peter Griffin's background, existing uneasily alongside the wealthy WASP establishment that formed Lois Pewterschmidt's background, both of them sitting in a fictional Rhode Island city that represents neither of them perfectly. The show used this class tension as a consistent source of material throughout its best years. Carter Pewterschmidt's contempt for Peter was funny precisely because it was specific. The contempt of old money for new nothing, of inherited status for someone who has none. Peter's obliviousness to this contempt was also funny precisely because of its specificity, the genuine inability to take seriously a hierarchy he does not recognize as legitimate, even when it is operating directly on him. The show also used American history as material, in ways that were more serious than they sometimes appeared. The Nate Griffin storyline, the revelations about the Pewterschmidt family's slave-holding past, the episode where Peter discovers he is undocumented, despite spending his life as a flag-waving American. These moments connect the Griffin family's present to a national history that the show did not always want to look at, directly but kept finding its way back to. The episode where Chris joins a protest movement, the various episodes where the show engaged directly with contemporary political controversies, the way the show's political satire shifted across its decades of production as the country changed around it, all of this adds up to a portrait of America that is messier and more honest than the show usually gets credit for. Family Guy at its best was not just making jokes about American culture. It was depicting that culture from the inside, from a position that was specific and located and rooted in actual places and actual histories. McFarlane grew up in a specific part of a specific state during a specific period of American history. That specificity is in the show. It gives the show its texture even when the jokes are at their broadest. The American Family Guy depicts is never generic. It is always particular, and the particularity is what makes it feel real even when everything happening in it is impossible. Expansion, the quiet moments and why they matter. The best moments in Family Guy are usually quiet ones. The loudest episodes, the most outrageous set pieces, the most aggressive humor, these are what the show is most famous for, the content that clips and compiles and spreads. But the quieter moments are what make the show worth returning to across 25 years. There is a scene in the early seasons where Peter comes home after having done something terrible, as he so often does, and Lois is standing in the kitchen, and you can see in the way she holds herself that she has been waiting with a specific kind of patience. Not the patience of someone who does not care, but the patience of someone who has learned that caring means waiting. Sometimes. And Peter walks in and he does not fully understand what he has done, but he understands that something is wrong, and he tries, in his limited and imprecise way, to make it right. And Lois, for reasons that are both about love and about exhaustion and about the specific texture of being married to this particular man, lets him. These moments are not funny. They are not the moments that get clipped and shared. But they are the load-bearing structures of the show, the reason that the funny moments carry weight rather than floating free. You can only laugh at someone as much as Family Guy asks you to laugh at Peter Griffin if you also know, somewhere underneath the comedy, that someone loves him. The love makes the comedy mean something. Without it, the jokes are just cruelty. The show understood this in its first 3 seasons with remarkable clarity. It understood it intermittently in the revival seasons. It lost the understanding more and more completely as the seasons went on. But the understanding was there at the beginning, built into the structure of the show by people who cared about why families are funny and what makes that comedy different from just being mean. What the show was reaching for, in those early episodes, was the kind of comedy that comedy has always reached for at its best: the recognition of shared human experience. The laugh of someone seeing themselves or someone they know in what is happening on screen. The specific relief of watching something absurd happen to a character you care about, knowing that absurdity is the texture of real life, and that caring about someone does not protect them from it. Peter Griffin is everyone who has ever had more confidence than skill. Lois Griffin is everyone who has ever loved someone difficult. Meg Griffin is everyone who has ever felt invisible in the place that was supposed to know them best. Brian Griffin is everyone who has ever wanted to be something other than what they are. Stewie Griffin is everyone who has ever needed to build walls around the parts of themselves that feel most vulnerable. That is why the show worked. That is what the show was, at its best. And that is what is still findable in its archive, on a quiet night when you know what you are looking for. End of script. Final expansion on watching things twice and finding them different. There is a specific pleasure in returning to a show you know well and discovering that it contains more than you remembered. Not because it has changed, the episodes are exactly what they were when you first watched them, but because you have changed, and the things that resonate now are not always the things that resonated then. Family Guy in its first 3 seasons is a different show depending on whether you watch it at 17 or 35. At 17, the cutaway gags are the main event. The irreverence, the refusal to be earnest, the way the show moves so fast that nothing has time to settle into significance, these are what make it feel alive and exciting. At 35, the cutaways are still funny, but the moments between them are where the show actually lives. The brief silences. The seconds before a character says something that reveals more than it was supposed to. The looks that pass between Peter and Lois in the margins of their more chaotic scenes. The mysteries we have visited tonight are mostly invisible on a first watch. You have to have seen the show enough times that the surface is familiar before the things underneath it become visible. You have to know the pilot well enough that the detail about Stewie's eye seems like something that was always going to become a reference point in a later episode. You have to have spent time with the Griffin family history stories before the Griffin-Pewterschmidt connection across generations starts to feel like something that was designed rather than incidental. This is what long-running shows do for their most committed audiences. They accumulate. They get denser. The longer you have been with them, the more they contain. Not because the writers are adding things retroactively, though sometimes they are, but because the density was always there, and familiarity is what makes it accessible. Quahog has been built over 25 years. Its mythology is deep enough now that nobody has fully mapped it. The show has contradicted itself enough times that you cannot hold all of it simultaneously and have it be consistent. But consistency was never the point. The point was always the density, the accumulation, the sense of a place that has been genuinely lived in rather than simply depicted. The Griffin family has been a family for 25 years, whatever that means in the strange temporality of animated television, where no one ages and nothing permanently changes, and the same house contains the same people in the same relationships, through decade after decade. The fact of the duration is real, even when the duration produces no visible growth. They have been the Griffins for 25 years. That is its own kind of permanence. Whatever mysteries remain unanswered, and there are many, the questions they leave behind are part of what makes return visits worthwhile. A show without unanswered questions is a show that has told you everything it knows about itself. Quahog still has more to tell. The archive is still full of details waiting to be found by someone paying close enough attention. Go look. Take your time. And wherever you are in the world, whatever hour it is as you close your eyes, I hope the night is easy.